Protesters want more of a say in choosing Hong Kong's leaders in a direct election, and that's scheduled for 2017. Is there any chance that the Chinese government will relent to the students' demands?
You know, I don't think the Chinese are incentivized anytime soon to create a greater model for democracy in Hong Kong, but they're also not incentivized anytime soon to see street demonstrations that might cast a shadow of doubt on the confidence and the viability of Hong Kong, because it's a thriving generator of GNP for them, certainly GDP for them, certainly not what it was back in '97 when they took it over, but certainly a strong special autonomous region, so they don't want to see it fail. So they're going to have to find some middle ground here in terms of finding compromises. What that looks like would be anybody's guess at this point, but the discussions with the students are going to pick up probably tonight our time, and they'll have to find some middle ground at some point in terms of how the slate of candidates for the chief executive position will ultimately be determined.
Well, Governor, what's at stake here, both politically and economically, for China?
You know, stability is of great concern to the Chinese leadership right now. They want domestic tranquility because without domestic tranquility, they can't grow economically. When you look at the political stakes, I'd have to say that the biggest issue for them longer term would be Taiwan. And kind of the unwritten story here is how they're interpreting this in Taiwan. You got to remember when Deng Xiaoping floated this whole one country, two systems concept back in the late 80s and early 90s, he had Taiwan in mind more than he had Hong Kong in mind. And with elections looming next year, at least at the municipal level, and then presidential elections in 2016 in Taiwan, they're going to be debating this issue with respect to how Hong Kong is treated and whether or not China is seen to be living up to their commitments. And that's going to have real implications, short-term and long-term, in Taiwan.
Yeah, what we are really talking about here, I believe it's free speech. Has the United States been too much of a passive observer regarding the events in Hong Kong?
Well, we have to be who we are, and we've got certain values associated with our name brand in the world. And I would say this is an issue that we're recognized and respected for, and our voice has not been heard, in my opinion.
Why do you suppose that is?
Well, I think, you know, the stakes sometimes are incredibly high and always very sensitive in dealing with China. And you have to find the right balance between speaking out on the issues that we feel deeply and passionately about, and then the ability to get business done in China, where they tend to draw back sometimes, at least with respect to certain of their economic and political initiatives, if we're saying the wrong thing.
Well, Governor, as I mentioned in the intro, you were the former U.S. ambassador to China. How did you find that balance? How did you strike that balance?
Well, you can't hide from who we are and what we stand for. That's principle number one. Principle number two is we typically don't do a very good job in aligning our national interests with the national interests of China. We tend to focus only on the areas of disagreement and divergence. We forget that there's a lot that we actually share in common, whether it's peace and security in the East Asia region, whether it's increasingly the Korean Peninsula and denuclearization, whether it's Afghanistan post-2015 when the NATO troops are all out, whether it's disease like we're seeing with Ebola, for example. There's just a lot that would bring us together under extraordinary circumstances like we face today, and we don't do a good enough job in aligning our interests. And I would say going forward, we're going to have to work on that.
Well, speaking of aligning interests, President Obama is scheduled to visit China next month. What's at the top of the economic agenda for the president and for Chinese leader Xi Jinping?
Well, I would say top of the agenda from a regional and multilateral standpoint would be the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is being negotiated. They've had probably 20-plus rounds of trade discussions so far. It includes 12 nation states of the Pacific. It's 40% of the world's GDP. It's a big, big deal. So I think multilaterally, that's probably number one. I'd say number two, at least I hope it is a bilateral investment treaty between the United States and China, which would make clear and more understood the rules of the road as it relates to Chinese investment here in the United States, and certainly improve our ability to make investments longer term in China with certain guarantees.
Governor, we have less than a minute left. The Chinese Central Committee, the ruling party of the Communist Party, it's holding its plenary session in Beijing. Are these sessions geared toward change, perhaps giving local jurisdictions more say, or do the talks reinforce the status quo?
So they started the fourth plenum of the 18th Party Congress today, and that'll play out over the next many days. And it will be part of Xi Jinping's very broad-based and ambitious attempt at reform. There's an economic reform part, there's a political reform part, which is sort of less apparent to most people. And he's going to talk about rule of law over the next couple of days. Now, what that means beyond just the political stability angle and how it affects investment and how it affects business and commercial ties, we'll have to see over the next little while. Suffice it to say that this round of discussions for the party is extremely important and will definitely play into Xi Jinping's reform agenda.